Margot, over to you.
Wonderful. Well, nice to meet all of you. I'm thrilled to be here today. And yeah, when we first connected and we're talking about doing like a book discussion and all, I was excited because I'm always excited to bring Trustworthy to new audiences, or I guess to audiences where I feel like I'm speaking truth to power, I guess. As one of the things that I discussed with my developmental editor and then literary agent when we were talking about the target audience for Trustworthy, I said, I want to arm as many people as possible with the thinking in this book. And that really annoyed her, because that was basically me saying, like, well, I don't want to pick just one target audience. I've got this sort of bifurcated audience. So Trustworthy focuses on, as we've seen this rise of cynicism and kind of a shift from just mere skepticism, but really cynicism around how people interact with information, what they're willing to believe from information and certain information sources. We've seen how sales cycles take longer. A lot of marketing messages are just falling flat. And really anybody that's in the business of persuading, selling a product or an idea or a political candidate, or empowering people to make better choices when they're deciding on maybe a political candidate or an idea or a product or their own health care or a medical decision, or maybe where to go out to eat that night. Anybody that is in the business of providing information or empowering people with information is now facing more and more of an uphill battle. And I started seeing that about 8 years ago in the political sector and in media coverage of the political sector here in the US. And then I wanted to see kind of more broadly, would that affect my clients who largely are not in the political sector? I've been a content strategy consultant for more than 20 years, and most of the organizations that I work with are in software or healthcare, hardware, some media institutions, educational institutions, not really the political sector. So I was like, okay, is this a big deal? And is this going to be my big deal? And it turns out the more I dug into it, the more it was really relevant to my clients. So I wanted to see, what can we do about this? Is there anybody that is doing anything about this and doing it well? And then what are the patterns that we can discern from them? What are the repeatable steps, or is there like a framework that we can pull from what they're doing? And that's what Trustworthy is. It's my analysis of that problem, how we got here, what we can do about it, and who's already doing things about it that I feel like are applicable to any organization, regardless of their size, industry, budget. I think that there are things that we can do to build greater trust with our audiences by refueling their confidence, rebuilding their trust in themselves and their own ability to weed through information, to make decisions based on that information. And it falls out into a framework looking at voice, volume, and vulnerability. Voice focuses on how we can build a consistent tone visually and verbally over time and across channels for an organization. In the section on volume, I look at the amount of information organizations need to share, the length and level of detail, again, both visually and verbally, to earn trust. And in the section on vulnerability, I look at how organizations can lean into their mistakes, develop greater rapport by kind of exposing more of the internal workings of the organization, maybe more of the values of the organization, and then what we can learn from that moving forward. So as I had to go back and kind of tell my editor going through this process, I felt like my audience for it was both the CMOs and the marketing managers, and as it turned out, also HR managers, as well as the folks that are kind of the boots on the ground in social media consulting, in content strategy, in content design, copywriting. So kind of all across that spectrum.
All right, very good. Thank you. That was a very condensed Reader's Digest version. Much appreciated. We actually already have the first question on the chat. Martin, do you want to just briefly
Yeah, yeah, it's been honored to talk with you, Margot. So in your book, you emphasize the consistency in building trust and but what I think is challenging. So I'm working in the automotive industry, where the industry is changing and there are different demands of the market. So you have to adapt to these situations. So can you help me in, okay, how can we as a company remain consistent over time when you need to adapt to these different situations and different challenges of the industry?
Mm. So I kind of feel like the drum that I have been beating with organizations for the past 20 years is around first knowing themselves and being able to articulate it. I mean, obviously that's way older than 20 years. That's kind of the Nathi Sotum carved over the entrance to the temple in Delphi. Um, know yourself, and then you can react in a way that is consistent to that. You can both be reactive and proactive in your messaging. So one of the things that I always do with organizations is first help them figure out their message architecture, their hierarchy of communication goals. Because I think until they know that, until they can say, it is always most important for us to project that we are innovative, or that we are like a driver's car, or that we are this reliable, calm experience. Um, I mean, that's the stuff right there that differentiates, like when Saab was, the road speaks to all cars, Saab's just listen differently. Like that was a new spin on a message that they had been hammering for a long, long time. Um, and I think like we can look across the automotive industry and see those singular messages and then how they play out visually and verbally. For a long time, I drove a Mini, and I miss that car dearly. But I think that was one of those brands that it sort of transcends industry when you see how they maintained a consistent message architecture of being supportive of spontaneous driving experiences, being a driver's car, being quirky in their message architecture. They use the term cheeky, kind of calling back to those British roots, and how that played out then visually and verbally. It even affected the channels that they were prioritizing to engage with their audiences. And I think by establishing those communication goals first, it allows you then to flex in a way that can react to market pressures, to say, you know, if everybody right now is looking for, say, fuel economy, what's our take on fuel economy? Or if everybody's looking to say, like, you know, we've all been homebound for so long, or maybe coming out of quarantine for so long. Now, how do we support more enjoyment through driving? Well, what's our take on that? And then I think you can look and see how that plays out through things like an editorial calendar, to have messaging that is both proactive and that you can hit at a specific cadence, but also weave in things that are appropriately reacting to different pressures in the market.
All right, thank you. At the meeting we were at, Carsten and I, earlier today, we talked about this understanding the problem before you sometimes perhaps too quickly move on to the solution. And you said the opening of the book is the analysis of the problem. It seems like there's this big trust crisis that also Edelman talks about once a year. Can you just share a little bit about your analysis of the trust problem?
Yeah, so and the Edelman Trust Barometer is something that I go back to frequently to see how we can pull in more of that research. So what I was seeing was that many things had changed. Going back 8-10 years, I was seeing how things had changed in how the media was covering at that point, the current political cycle in the US, where previously it used to be that if a journalist caught a politician in a lie, that could scuttle their campaign. That was not happening, though. Like, we go back to when in the presidential election cycle between Trump and Hillary Clinton, we are seeing how there was sometimes doublespeak on both sides of the aisle, where they were maybe adjusting their take on personal and political history, let's say. And even if major media outlets were covering it and and kind of holding their feet to the fire and saying, you said this, but let's contrast it with the reality of what happened. Even when they were pointing out that gap, their respective audiences were not changing their support of those candidates, their loyalty of those candidates. And that struck me as odd, because that was less about how we take in new information and let it adjust our perspectives, and more about how we wall ourselves off from information, maybe to maintain those perspectives. So a lot of my analysis was looking at that, and then looking at how it played out over, if it was playing out over other industries. And actually, I went back and looked at, in the automotive industry, what happened around Volkswagen and their emissions scandal. And something that I thought was really interesting there was that their market share did not really slip. What we were seeing in the US, also what we were seeing in Europe, was that if someone thought of themselves as a Volkswagen driver, they would take in this new information and it would not necessarily affect their buying habits. So maybe it wasn't that people were walling themselves off from information or growing cynical toward that information, rather that their own perceptions of how they would use that information was changing. So that led me to dig more into, well, how do we use information? That requires a degree of vulnerability, holding ourselves open to new information and allowing it to affect our worldviews and our habits, but also a degree of confidence, of being able to say, I've learned enough, maybe I've consulted enough sources, or I've read enough competitive analysis that I can make a decision based on this information. Also, that I have the right degree of confidence in my ability to make choices, to make decisions based on new information. And that's where I saw we were facing a problem. Because as we look at things that were going on in coverage of politics and a lot of the speech coming out of the political arena itself, we're seeing this rise in gaslighting. There's a reason why it became like word of the year and why Merriam-Webster was writing long blog posts about it. And that's because when you've got major industries, the media covering those industries, people that have previously been put up on pedestals as being arbiters of truth, all saying, you can't trust the evidence of your own eyes. Only look to us as a source of information. Only look to me as kind of like the real source of information. When we have major institutions saying that, people lose their ability to make decisions in a decisive and effective and timely way. That's in part why we see sales cycles slowing down, because people say, I want to do a little bit more research, or let me not make a decision. Let me just stick with what I've been doing, which we know is kind of a decision in and of itself. But we were seeing this real problem with confidence. So I wanted to look and see, well, how do we rebuild someone's confidence to make good decisions? And at the core of that is education. It's in the type of content that doesn't seek to dumb things down, but tries to build people up instead. One of the examples that I have in the book is from MailChimp. And we know them as an email marketing platform. They've obviously branched out into other areas as well. Something that they've always done in terms of maintaining their brand over time and speaking to multiple audiences is breaking things down in a way that respects those audiences. So that if somebody that's new to marketing is working with MailChimp for the first time, they can find basic definitions. They can find kind of basic how-to explanations of how to use the tool, but also how to get started with this aspect of marketing. But at the same time, if it's somebody that's a more experienced marketing manager, maybe somebody that's coming over from the competitor, they're not going to find content that talks down to them. And I think that we can learn a lot from that example. Another one that is becoming increasingly familiar is the NHS, the way the National Health Service in the UK doesn't seek to dumb things down, but speaks in the vernacular, and then oftentimes pairs it with definitions, so that they might say things like, if you're going in with I don't know, maybe because you've recently had a trauma and you're seeing swelling in a joint, or what your doctor might term inflammation. So they're always pairing vernacular language with more, that's probably a poor example, but slightly more technical terms there to help someone get smarter so that they can have a more empowered and educated conversation with a healthcare practitioner, so that they can ask better questions and then make more informed decisions themselves. So I think we can look at that problem that I was seeing around confidence and counter it through our own work with education.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Do you have a copy of the book there, Margot, that you could sign for me?
I do, yeah, I can kind of fling it through the pipes.
Woo!
Yeah.
All right, we'll have to do that next time I swing by Boston.
I would love that.
Other questions, comments, reflections? You can jump in or write in the chat, or Dan, do you want to say something?
No, sorry, I was trying to mute myself, but I unmuted myself instead. So.
All right, but how about, so you spoke about vulnerability, which I think is a key point for trust. How about volume? Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. So when I'm using the term volume, it's to refer to the amount of information that we're sharing and how that can destabilize some people, how that can empower some people. And it really goes back to that message architecture around a brand's communication goals and what's appropriate for a brand and for their target audiences. And I mean, we can see kind of like the visual, some good visual examples of that when you compare diagrams from IKEA with diagrams from pretty much any other furniture manufacturer that's saying, here's how you assemble this thing, or even just diagrams from IKEA with diagrams from like Lego. One is much, much more detailed for usually a younger target audience to say, here's how you're going to do it. We'll be with you every step of the way. Don't worry. It's going to come out like the picture on the front of the box. You're going to get this right. The other case, IKEA, whether it's in their diagrams or their in-store experience, there's a lot more, you can navigate this, you'll get through it okay, don't worry, we'll be here to support you. More of like that kind of tone that encourages someone to pick up a pretty simple map, a pretty simple visual cue, look at it and realize, okay, I'm putting together these 4 parts. All I'm going to need is this little Allen wrench and it'll be fine. So there's a different degree there of hand-holding and empowerment that conveys a degree of respect to the audience. One of the other examples that I shared more on kind of like the verbal side of things is from the publishing company America's Test Kitchen. So they publish literally dozens of cookbooks a year. Also Cook's Country magazine, Cook's Illustrated magazine. They've got an online cooking school. There are, I think at least a couple different television programs now that they produce. And they are known for deep, deep detail, so that if someone is engaging with their brand, they know that they can see everything about the history of a particular cooking technique or ingredient. They can find out, like if they're recommending a particular pot or utensil, they know that America's Test Kitchen has tried 50 different versions of it, and now they're able to say, this is the best one. And one of the reasons why they're a very trusted brand with a very loyal audience is because they share and publish that much information. You can easily comb through it. You can see that these are the 50 different tests that they ran on those 50 different pots and pans. So that if you wanted to, you could replicate similar tests at home. When I sat down with their chief communications officer, Jack Bishop, he explained that they share that information because their audience likes to see it, but their audience doesn't necessarily read it. They don't necessarily look through it. They just like knowing that it's there. And that's interesting. It's sort of like knowing that there's that big, rich index in the back of the book or 1,000,001 footnotes sometimes gives you more confidence in the author, even if you don't actually take the time to read through all of those footnotes. It's nice knowing that they did their research and that they tracked down all of those loose ends. And so sometimes having like that access to data, that volume of information, is also what conveys confidence or conveys reasons to trust a brand. But then, I mean, I think at this point, a lot of us are familiar with the example from gov.uk that sometimes more is not more. When they were maintaining, I think it was something like 75,000 pages of content across 9 different websites, publishing information from the British government about how to interact with the British government. By and large, people were turning away from their 9 different websites and instead looking to The Guardian to find out what to do, how to engage with the government about different services. It was overwhelming, so they couldn't use it to make good decisions. They went through a big content audit and content culling process that reduced those 75,000 pages down to 3,000 pages, adopting that mantra that government should only publish content on things on which only government can publish content. And that helped them earn confidence. So I think the amount of information an organization publishes and maintains over time, that has to correlate to the brand, to the communication goals of the brand and the needs of the audience as well.
Thank you. And then in the chat, we had kind of almost like a Q&A between Rahel and Jam. Jam, could you pick it up? I'm not sure what you meant by the just asking questions.
Let me ask.
Okay, camera on. Hello. Yes, so Rahel's point about people making big giant statements that are clearly misleading and then quietly retracting them on the back page of a subsequent edition or whatever. I think that another version of that is this sort of bluffing that happens in certain sectors of the media where they'll where was he then? Where was she then? Who knew about this? And then they're making very clear implications, but if it comes down to it, they say, oh, I was just asking questions, right? So the whole area of misinformation is subtle and devious.
So Rahel, did you want to add something extra?
I just see this, I don't know if it's extra, but I just see this over and over and over again. And we've known about this for many years. And, you know, they said, once you have like social media, it's going to get better. And it got worse, I think. And then, and now we've got, and, you know, Margot and I were discussing this in a different forum about chat GPT, where now you can generate a whole bunch of bump because we've seen where chat GPT actually invents references. And so, you know, somebody like can declare something and people will believe it. So, you know, are we seeing this getting more sophisticated? Is this going to go away? Is it going to get worse? Have you seen any trends? Because it's definitely crazy making. And I'm like, I can't watch any political stuff on television because it just enrages me so much. I have to leave after like 2 minutes.
I don't blame you. It's because, like, we've joked for a long time, why can't we have better real-time fact checking for political debates or any kind of political speech? And that idea of fact checking, that is becoming more complex. I think we've been starting to see this with the rise of ChatGPT or other machine learning enabled content generation that is able to just spew out more and kind of overwhelm the field with that volume by just creating more. Puts greater onus on fact checkers, on editors, on people to determine, well, is this accurate or is there simply a lot of it? And those are very distinct things. So I think ChatGPT is creating a lot more work for those of us that focus on content quality and will focus on accuracy in content. I think as far as if this kind of content, the garbage proliferation, if it has gotten more sophisticated, I don't think that it has. Because I think I think Jam, you had said that people are kind of putting more garbage out there and then saying, look, well, I was just asking a question about it. You know, I'm just posing this as a question. And that kind of rhetorical style has been around for a long time. I think we maybe saw it perfected by, oh gosh, I apologize, I'm forgetting the politician's name, the political operative's name, who was conducting push polling for a candidate running against John McCain. So probably like 15, 20 years ago, in a US presidential election cycle, where I think it was Karl Rove. He was push polling, putting out questions via an automated poll to an audience. And the question that he seeded in there was, would it bother you to know that John McCain has a child of a different race? And I mean, he's just asking an innocuous question. He just wants to collect that data, right? But turns out you ask that question of racist people and they're going to run with it. They're going to run with the fact that, yeah, sometimes John McCain appears on stage with people of other races and ethnicities. And it happened to scuttle his campaign because he was just asking an innocent question. But that idea of how we seed an audience with information that may be spurious or maybe incomplete, turns out John McCain has some adopted children as well, and that's not a thing. It's not a big deal. It's not a little deal. It's not really even a thing. But it was something that Karl Rove kind of perfected in that election cycle, how you seed misinformation or willful disinformation within a population to allow the story to just explode. And then we've seen that kind of get used again and again. It has not gotten more sophisticated. It's just our means of creating garbage information that has gotten more sophisticated, because now we can automate it. We can create a lot more and cause editors to scramble to keep up with it.
I'm afraid that's kind of all the time we had. I'm gonna need to follow up with you on a question or two more that I had, but we can put that in the blog post. Thank you everybody for finding the time. Thanks Carsten for hosting me here. Thanks Margot for joining us early in the morning on the East Coast and for sharing insights on quite an important topic. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.